All right, good afternoon to those of you that are online. We are just about to get started. We're going to go ahead and give us a few minutes to let everybody log in, and we'll get started with our workshop here shortly. Okay, so I see it looks like most of the participants have logged in, and it is 1:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. You have logged in to the 2024 Local Partnership Program Guidelines Development Workshop number 3. Today, we're going to be talking about both the competitive program and the formulaic program. And we're going to go ahead and get started with introductions. Celeste, can you move us to the next slide, please? And next slide. So myself, my name is LaShara Ward, and I'm the Associate Deputy Director for the Local Partnership Program. And I'm currently overseeing both the competitive and the formulaic programs. Benjamin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would. Hi, everyone. My name is Benjamin Williams, and I'm a program analyst with the Local Partnership Program here at the Commission.
And Matthew?
Thanks, LaShara. Nice to see everybody this afternoon. I'm Matthew Osgood. I'm the Deputy Director for SB1 Programming here at the Commission. So back to you, LaShara.
Okay, so I think Ben's going to take us through some logistics. Next slide, please.
That I will be. So we welcome comments and questions as a part of each item at this workshop. We encourage you to use the raise the hand feature as early into an item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. Alternatively, you may use the Q&A tab to submit your questions and or comments. Please specify the item or topic you are commenting on. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please clearly state your name and organization at the start of your comment. And each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access this webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as they are registered to a specific attendee and can create confusion for staff when providing comments. In addition, this presentation is being recorded, and the recording, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, will be made available after we are done here today. Thank you, and next slide, please.
Okay, so we're going to quickly go over the agenda for today. We are going to start off by doing Celeste, you can go to the next slide, please. We're going to be talking about, first of all, some eligibility. I didn't put this on the agenda here, but we are going to do a quick recap of what the Local Partnership Program is in case we have new folks that are joining us today and that don't have a lot of background with the program. So we will give you, orient you that way to begin with. And then we're going to take a few minutes to talk about some of the items that were talked about in the last 2 workshops, actually the last 4 workshops, and just do a real quick recap. And then we're going to go into the proposed changes that we have for the guidelines for this 2024 program. And as we go through that, if you have any comments or suggestions, please raise your hand, as Benjamin just explained, or send your question in the chat, and we would like to address those as we go along. But then we will have an opportunity for a more general discussion and feedback. So start thinking about your ideas or questions that you might have had, especially if you've had an LPP program in the past and you found some sort of stumbling block, something that you wanted to talk about that might help to improve the program moving forward. Then we're going to talk about the office hours and more discussion, and then some action items, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. Next slide, please. So getting into the eligibility and funding. If you move to the next slide, please, Celeste. We do have an explanation here for the two different programs. So it is all under the umbrella of the local partnership program, but we have two different programs. One is formulaic and the other is competitive. For the competitive program, in order to be an eligible agency, you have to have imposed fees, including uniform developer fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements. You have to be a taxing authority. For the formulaic program, you can be an eligible agency if you are a taxing authority that has sought and received voter approval of taxes, tolls, or fees, which are dedicated solely to transportation improvements. And the agency must also administer those taxes, tolls, or fees. For the eligibility criteria, we have two different approaches. For the competitive program, it's more stringent. For the formulaic program, it is less stringent because you've already gone through the process of getting your voter approved initiatives passed. So for, excuse me for that, my speaker was making noises. For the competitive program, it is for, we screen for eligibility and completeness, and then we use the following evaluation criteria to inform the project selection. And those criteria include accessibility, deliverability, projects that leverage funds above the required match, safety, air quality and greenhouse gases, vehicle miles traveled, community engagement, system preservation, and land use and housing goals. And you'll see as we get further on into this discussion that those criteria are not changing, but we are making some slight tweaks to some of them. So I hope that you will enjoy those little tweaks that we are making. For the formulaic program, we are just screening for eligibility and completeness. It does not go through the same evaluation process that the competitive program does. Okay, next slide, please. The LPP receives $200 million a year, which is split between the formulaic and the competitive programs. Of those funds, $20 million is set aside as incentive for newly eligible agencies, and the remaining $180 million is split, with 60% being distributed to eligible agencies by formula and the remaining 40% being awarded through the competitive process. One-time incentive funding will be provided to jurisdictions that seek and receive voter approval of new or renewed tax measures, tolls, or fees. If those tax measures, tolls, or fees have a minimum period of 10 years and are dedicated solely to transportation, and for the sales taxes are equal to or greater than 1/4 cents. This $20 million per year comes off the top before it's split between the formulaic and competitive programs. And the amount of incentive funding will be based on the projected annual revenue of the voter approved tax, toll, or fee initiative, with a minimum of $200,000 and a maximum of $5 million. For all program cycles, we combine multiple years of funding. So for the 2022 program, for the 2024 program, which is what I have up here, in both the competitive and formulaic program, we combine 2 years of funding. So the competitive program has $144 million to award, and the formulaic program has $216 million to distribute. Next slide, please. And Ben, would you like to take us through the workshop recap, please?
Yes, I would. Next slide, please. So at the first workshop, we had 104 viewers. At the second workshop, we had 66 viewers. Out of these, 70% were from local jurisdictions, 20% were from Caltrans, and 10% represented private individuals and businesses. At the last two workshops, several topics were discussed, amongst which the most notable were whether a percentage of LPPC funds should be expended in jurisdictions with certified housing elements, the role of Justice 40 in the local partnership program, As a side note, the CTC is currently evaluating Justice 40's applicability with the local partnership program. The levels of engagement and outreach the CTC is looking for with LPP. The difference between the local partnership formulaic and competitive programs. Possible changes to the competitive program maximum award of 25 million. The majority of feedback I would like to note we received expressed support for the current maximum award. The addition of Appendix A to the formulaic guidelines. This is something we will also be addressing in this workshop. And we also, in addition, had several frequently asked program questions, such as if funds are able to be used for cost increases in the competitive program, how to see if an agency is eligible for local partnership program funds, under what circumstances agencies can receive time extensions, if program funds can be moved across different fiscal years, and finally, if any eligibility criteria are weighed more heavily than others. Next slide, please, Celeste. Thank you. At the first and second LPP workshops, we received the following feedback from stakeholders. First, that no set-asides of funding should be created for the local partnership competitive or formulaic programs. Second, that there should be documents submitted to show public engagement for the formulaic program, but that there should be a level of flexibility in the type of documentation that should be submitted when submitting a nomination packet. Documents do not need to be extensive, but should show the public has been engaged to some degree. Third, we received feedback that the current maximum award, as previously mentioned, of 25 million for the local partnership competitive program is a fair maximum award. Next slide, please, and I believe Lashar will be taking over.
Thank you, Ben. We do have one comment in the chat questioning the percentage that I went over. And so I just want to remind you that the 20 million for the incentive is taken off at the top, and then we split the remainder by the 60-40. And that's how we come up with the numbers there. Okay, so let's get into the 2024 competitive guidelines recommendations. So all of these recommendations are currently going through executive review. So these are still in draft form. And if you have any questions or comments about any of the recommendations that we're going to talk about today, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, to put something in the chat, or to go ahead and send us an email later. We do have a deadline of May 30th, so just a few more days to be able to send any kind of comments in, but we'll talk about that later. So let's get into this one. So Celeste has put the link to the guidelines in the chat. So if you want to pull those up, you can follow along with me. Right now I'm looking at the competitive program guidelines, and we're at section 6B. Most of these recommendations that we have for today are just going to be, a lot of it is clarifying language. There's not any big overhaul of any of the guidelines. So I'm just going to read through it, and if there's any questions or comments, I'll pause after, and you'll have an opportunity to talk about that. So let's go ahead. This is number C, the acquisition, retrofit, or rehabilitation of rolling stock, buses, or other transit equipment, technology, and software, including but not limited to maintenance facilities, transit stations, transit guideways, passenger shelters, and fare collection equipment with a useful life of at least 10 years and necessary for the provision or maintenance of fixed route or demand responsive transit services, including but not limited to microtransit, paratransit, non-medical transportation, and non-emergency transportation. The acquisition of vans, buses, and other equipment necessary for the provision of fixed route or demand responsive transit services, including but not limited to microtransit, paratransit, non-medical transportation, and non-emergency transportation for seniors and people with disabilities by transit and other local agencies is an eligible project under this paragraph. And I'm just gonna pause and see if we have any questions or comments on this one. Okay, seeing none, we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this one is actually new as far as eligible projects. It's not necessarily new to the program, but we are spelling it out a little more clearly in the guidelines. And this is going to be a new section J, projects that propose to construct a toll transportation facility and are successful in the local partnership competitive program must request approval from the commission to operate the toll facility in accordance with the commission's toll facility application guidelines prior to the project being programmed. Do we have any questions or comments? Shelly's asking where the link is for the draft so they can follow along. It was posted in the chat earlier, but if you joined after it had been posted, you may have missed it. So, Celeste, would you mind reposting that, please?
Hey, Lashar, I'll just clarify really quick. I have a feeling Shelly is asking for a draft that contains the language we're presenting right now. And we do not have a draft that currently includes the slides that you're sharing right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and we will share that after this in the form of this PowerPoint, correct?
Correct.
So there you go, Shelly. We don't have this out there right now, but we will shortly. And then I'll just say right now, all of the changes that Lashar is proposing today to the guidelines will be included in the version of Lashar's competitive and formula guidelines when we post the guidelines for our June commission meeting on June 14th. So that's when you'll see all of the changes incorporated into the full sets of guidelines.
Yes. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, so let's move on to the next one, please. So this is 10B. This is under the funding restrictions section. A project will be considered for funding if, at the time of adoption, the project has completed a project-level environmental process and or completed the final draft of a project-level environmental document in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and if the project is federalized, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. Environmental clearance must be completed for CEQA and NEPA, if applicable, within 6 months of program adoption. That part, the part that's in black text, is what is currently in the guidelines. And then the new section is not new, but we're trying to spell it out just a little bit more. If these requirements are not met, the project will be deleted from the program. For projects that will not meet the applicable environmental requirements by program adoption, applications must explain the status of the environmental phase and the plan for environmental requirements to be met within 6 months of program adoption. So any questions or comments there? Okay, seeing none, Celeste, let's move to the next one, please. So this one is also, it is not new. It is something that we are spelling out in the guidelines because agencies have been surprised and not prepared when it came to baseline agreement preparation. Not all agencies, not all projects, I should say, will require a baseline agreement. And we do have a threshold for that baseline agreement, which I am forgetting right now. So I'm going to ask Matthew to remind me what that baseline, what the threshold is.
No worries, Lashara. And yes, I'm very familiar with the threshold because I drafted the accountability and transparency guidelines. So in the LPP competitive program only, so not the LPP formula program, projects that receive $10 million or more in LPP competitive funds, or projects that have a total project cost of $25 million or more will require a baseline agreement once the project has been adopted into the program. So the provision that you see in front of us right now is only applicable to those projects. Smaller projects that don't meet that threshold will not require a project report or a project report equivalent.
Thank you, Matthew. So I didn't read this one out, but I think that you all can read it. So do we have any questions or comments on this one? Okay, Celeste, let's move to the next one. So this one is not new either. We are just at this point asking that applicants indicate which population category the nominating agency is eligible for. This has been in the guidelines for quite a while, but the agencies are not necessarily spelling it out, which then creates a lot of staff work on our end to have to go look it up for each of those agencies. So if you guys can just plop that into your nomination application, it'll save us a whole bunch of time. And that's all there is with this one. Shelley has a hand raised. Yes. There we go. So I have allowed you to unmute. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I didn't okay. I'm doubting my reading comprehension. Oh, this is Shelley Kwan with LA Metro. I'm still trying to comprehend the last slide. Sorry, a little slow. Is it saying that projects on local streets and roads or transit projects also require a Caltrans approved project report?
Hold on, Shelley. Celeste, do you mind going back one slide?
Yeah.
So, Lashara, if you're okay, I'll take this one because I worked with Angela on this. So what we're saying is, so we know that a project report itself is a Caltrans document. However, a project report equivalent would be not a Caltrans required project report. And what we're saying is for local road or active transportation or transit improvements that are not implemented or coordinated with Caltrans, what we will require is some form of equivalent, which could be, you know, a completed environmental document that shows the entire plans, that, you know, something that showed the quite frankly, like the project initiation, like at the local implementing scale that could be deemed equivalent to a project report. And we're very flexible what that is, but we're basically saying we need something additional to a project programming request, which is the PPR, something addition to the signature page, and something in addition to I guess it'd just be those two documents. So we're saying we need a bit more from like a project initiation standpoint at the local level. So I hope that clears it up, because we're not saying it has to be a specific Caltrans, you know, coordinated project report, something that would be deemed equivalent to that, and we can work with all partners on what that is.
Okay, this is sounding familiar. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's come up a lot in the past. Yeah, so Jillian, I think we want to keep the language. So I'll read Jillian's question or comment into the record so everybody understands. Jillian from Riverside County TC suggested if we accept an environmental document, we should write that into the guidelines. I think the reason we don't want to start specifying what a project report equivalent is it actually gives us some flexibility to work out what that is with our stakeholders. Some projects are not through the environmental document when they're developing a baseline agreement. Obviously, and now I think we're deviating a little bit from LPP and we're getting into the accountability and transparency requirements. But as you know, projects are not required to complete environmental by program adoption. They're required to approve environmental within 6 months. And then baseline agreements are given an additional 6 months from the point that the environmental is cleared. And so I think if we just automatically accept the environmental document, even though we would consider that equivalent, we don't want to spell that out, because then if there's other material that we can collect in lieu of that, if it's not available, we would accept that as well.
So Matthew, I think that Jillian would like to continue the conversation. So Jillian, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. That makes a lot of sense. What was coming to my mind came up when we were working on our 24 STIP submittal. And we have a project with an approved environmental document, but it's off system and there never was like a PR equivalent or PSR equivalent done. And so the agency nominating the STIP project had to spend money and a couple months like preparing one, even though they had an approved environmental. So that was where I was coming from. I always appreciate flexibility, but seemingly like in the STIP, and maybe it's different. Maybe there was a reason.
So yes, and Jillian, maybe for the sake of our attendees and for the sake of us, I don't believe we have Casey Ruggiero on the line with us right now to speak to the STIP requirement. I want to be very careful that if we deem something as a PR equivalent in the SB1 programs and STIP will accept a PR equivalent for STIP purposes, I don't want, I mean, I know we're all commission programs here, but I also know that the STIP is a lot more statutorily driven, and it's also it has a lot more historical precedent set. In the SB1 programs where, we have a degree of flexibility for processes like this. And so I would be more than happy to continue this conversation with you, as well as with Casey, on that situation you spoke of, because I have also heard in the SB1 programs that, it can cost tens of thousands of dollars to come up with a PR equivalent if an environmental document, which lays out a lot of key details, can be presented. And we certainly don't want that scenario, but if that is some way, somehow a requirement in STIP and it's not in the SB1 programs, I don't want to assume that what we would require in SB1 is also applicable to STIP. So I hope that, so in the sense of the SB1 programs, I'm preferring to keep it flexible, because I do understand we would accept like a completed environmental document in lieu of a PR, and it would be considered a PR equivalent. But if we put that the environmental document is an acceptable form in the guidelines, I would worry that if someone wanted to utilize that for the purposes of, sufficing for STIP, that could be a bit challenging in terms of what the STIP process is. So I suppose I should just say, I don't know enough about the STIP requirement, and we can have an offline conversation about that. But I saw Jillian went on mute, and I'm going to assume that means understood. Okay, thank you, Jillian.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, Celeste, I think that we were up to the next slide after this. Okay, this one is pretty blank. It doesn't mean we're not making changes. It means that if you're following along in the guidelines, this is where the changes will be. But I'm going to let Naveen talk about the community engagement and equity supplement a little bit later in this presentation. So put a little sticky note in this section of the guidelines, because we will revisit this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is section 14B on the evaluation criteria. We are adding economic development and job creation to our cost effectiveness selection criteria. So previously, we just talked about cost effectiveness and the CalBC, the benefit cost analysis tool. We are now adding everything in blue. So I'll go ahead and I'll read that. The nomination must address how the proposed project stimulates local economic activity, supports economic development, creates or increases access to employment. How does the project support economic development and improve access to employment for disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities? How does the proposed project improve access to economic opportunities and the movement of goods and services in the region? If applicable, provide the number and types of jobs created by this project's delivery. Include any efforts to develop local jobs and workforce development opportunities consistent with federal and state laws. For more information about workforce development, visit the California Workforce Development Board's website, and that will be a link in the guidelines. Identify and discuss other economic impacts the project will have. And I am going to pause and see if we have any questions or comments. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we will move on to the next one. And as always, if you think of a question later, don't hesitate to speak up at another time. Okay, so this is also evaluation criteria, and we encountered this during the last cycle when we were doing the evaluations. A lot of the evaluators were engineers, and when they saw system preservation, they thought pavement condition index, and that's all they thought. But we're evaluating transit projects, we're evaluating transit station projects, and they're all eligible to be part of this program. So we expanded on the idea of system preservation beyond the pavement condition index to include the overall transit or transportation system. Do you have any questions or comments on that one? Okay, we can move on to the next one. So for delivery methods, we wanted to go ahead and recognize that some of our agencies and awardees are using progressive design build. So we've thrown that in here. We are open to a variety of different delivery methods. We do want to be sure that the LPP funds, the intent of the LPP program is, well, specifically for the competitive program, is to reimburse for construction-related costs only. And we do have some agencies that are using progressive design builds a bit more than others. And we are waiting for their comments. They were going to look at possibly coming up with some guidelines that would help us to work with those types of delivery methods a little bit better, but we haven't seen those yet, so we don't have anything to share. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the deadlines, nothing is new here, but we are just spelling out what not everybody seems to know. And that is that at the time of allocation, generally the time for project completion is 36 months. However, at allocation, you can request for additional time. So we're just spelling this out here in this little section at 23B. Any questions or comments there? Yes, Shelley, let me get you unmuted.
Is it possible to extend this ability to additional time on contract award as well?
On contract award, at the time of allocation,
Yes.
I have not seen that. Matthew, do you have any? I
So,
mean, yeah, go ahead.
so Shelley, are you asking, so what if an agency allocates, you're asking for additional time to award at allocation, and then that would preserve the timely use of funds to request a time extension as well? Is that your question?
Exactly.
Yeah, so this has come up, and I think we have a firm response that the only milestone that we're willing to extend additional time at allocation is for contract delivery or project completion. The reason being, it won't push the use of funds so far out that it extends far beyond our timely use of funds. Now, if I can say, if there's a scenario where, let's just, I mean, because you represent Metro, so I'm going to use Metro as an example. Metro allocates a project and you have 6 months to award. You know that you're not going to award it for 12 months. You know, let's say you at time of allocation, you also understand you're going to likely need to use a time extension to award. That obviously is an option you have available to you to request. Let's say for whatever reason in that 6 months, you understand you're going to need more, because I believe we allow contract award extensions up to 12 months. So that means that within your existing timely use of funds, if you allocate, you could feasibly push out your award for 18 months. I think we've determined that that's well enough time within our existing allowance for contract award, without letting it, you know, kind of manifest into pushing, you know, the use of the funds out considerably. Now, if you get to a 6 month mark where you know you can't award, you need a time extension, and let's say, you know, something unforeseen and unavoidable happen and you need longer than 12 months, I think it's a better opportunity to ask us for flexibility on the 12-month contract award extension than it would be to just giving more time at allocation. So if that's a scenario that, you know, Metro finds itself in, or any of our agencies find themselves in, I would suggest it's likely better to request additional time through the time extension process, as opposed, and I know that it probably sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I know we want to be very careful not to find ourselves in situations where we're allowing additional time at allocation right off the bat. Because quite frankly, if the project is not ready to allocate, you can request an allocation time extension as well. You know, I hope that answers your question. I know that there's probably scenarios that are not entirely you know, obvious to us as commission staff, but I think that those unforeseen situations are addressed through our existing timely use of funds policy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for explaining. I think the desire to do it at the time of allocation is because we know as we are completing projects with more complex contracts that the procurement will take longer. We do need to allocate though in order to, I don't know, get the ball rolling on the bids and things like that. But so we do know at the time we allocate that it's going to take us longer to award. And so when we fill out an extension request later, I don't know that we can say it's necessarily unforeseen because we knew it.
I understand, and I'm writing this down because I see a few other hands have gone up, and I'm assuming they were, well, let's hear what they have to say. But Shelley, I'll say I will take this back because it's obviously something that has come up. It's something that's come up, and the question, I'll just be honest to the entire group. The question I get from my executive team is, well, is what they're seeking available in our existing policy? And the answer is always yes. It just does require an additional time extension. And I know that a time extension requires additional paperwork and additional back and forth with the commission and Caltrans and you know, our regional and local partners. but that's currently where the stance is. But I'll take this back, and Lashar, I'll let you call on the others who have their hands raised.
All right, I
Okay.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. Carl, you can unmute yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Lashara. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelley, for the question, and Matthew, thanks for the follow-up. I'll just say from MTC's perspective, we're very supportive of Shelley's comment and question, and would appreciate the flexibility be embedded in the guidelines as opposed to working off of just theoretical allowances once a project, got to a juncture where it needed to ask for additional time at the award. And I feel like they'd be consistent with the other best practices in other programs by allowing it to take place, by allowing an award extension to take place at the time of allocation that wouldn't count against the extension limit. So just wanted to say that MTC is supportive of Shelley's comment.
So Carl, on that last point, are you referring, is that something that like STIP or ATP allow?
Yes, that's something that can be done in the STIP.
What about the ATP?
I can't remember off the top of my head without the guidelines in front of me. So I'm not gonna,
Sure, no. But I appreciate you putting
I
that
mean, I
up.
can look it up very quickly and find
Yeah.
out. But I don't have the answer.
No, you don't need to do that. I'm asking you a question that I should know the answer to because I work at the commission. I appreciate that, and we'll take that back. And if the STIP allows for that degree of flexibility, it could go a bit more in terms of us incorporating it as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew. And then I feel like it just, meets the intent or the spirit of the local partnership program, where it's a super flexible program and we see project sponsors, going after what I would say unique project delivery methods in this program more often in other programs. So I think just adding the flexibility here would be very appreciated.
And just to clarify, Carl, you're talking about the contract award, right?
Yeah. So just clarifying at the time of allocation that if the sponsor already knows that the award may take longer than the 6 months for whatever unique circumstance, to be allowed to request additional months for award that wouldn't count as their one extension request under the time use of funds policies.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. Okay, any other comments on this particular guideline? Okay, let's go ahead and move to the next one, Celeste. Okay, so speaking of contract award, this is what we have. The construction phase contracts must be awarded within 6 months of an approved allocation. And this blue section is, again, just clarification. If the contracts are not awarded within 6 months of allocation, the agency can request a contract award time extension within one commission meeting after expiration. If the contract award time extension is not requested by then, the project phase component will be deleted from the local partnership competitive program. So this is just clarifying that you don't necessarily have to be on the agenda for the month that your what is it called? The deadline, sorry. So you don't have to be on the agenda in the same month that your deadline is expiring. You can submit your request in that month and then get on to the next agenda. Okay, so are there any questions or comments about that one?
Hey, Lashara, this is Matthew. And I'm just going to clarify a little bit based on some of the dialogue we had yesterday on the TSEP workshop, because I think it might be helpful context for this group as well. So if in the instance that an agency knows they won't award within 6 months and they will need to request a time extension, what we're saying is we understand that awarding contracts is a very unpredictable milestone, given, you have to, propose, or you have to public offer a request for proposals, and then there's a timeliness to getting a selected proposal to your respective boards, and that sometimes the timing is very, very close. So what this is saying is, as long as you submit a request for a time extension by the deadline to award, we will honor that and bring the time extension to the subsequent commission meeting because of the sensitivity of the contract award milestone. This does not mean that if you miss your deadline and then submit paperwork for a time extension in the following month, that would be honored. That would be considered outside this policy that Lashara is posing right now. So she explained it very well. I'm not suggesting you didn't, Lashara. I just want to make that crystal clear because it came up yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. Do we have any questions or comments? Okay, moving to the next one. This is for project completion, section 23B. After award of the construction phase contracts, the implementing agency has up to 36 months to complete or accept the contracts. The implementing agency must invoice Caltrans for these costs no later than 180 days after the completion deadline. This is actually California law. We just wanted to clarify, it's just clarifying language in the guidelines here. All right, no, I'm not seeing any questions or comments. Let's move on to the next one. So this one is new. So I'm going to go ahead and read this one. Pursuant to Streets and Highways Code Section 2038, by July 1st, 2023, agencies receiving road maintenance and rehabilitation account funds will need to describe how projects will address participation and investment in new or existing pre-apprenticeship training programs that focus on outreach to women, minority participants, underrepresented subgroups, formerly incarcerated individuals, and local residents to access employment opportunities. Therefore, this information should be included in the semi-annual reports submitted to Caltrans. Any questions on this one? Okay, moving to the next one. Project signage. So this was in previously in the guidelines. It's just being updated. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. For all projects receiving SB1 funds, the implementing agency must include signage stating that the project was made possible by Rebuilding California funds. All projects receiving federal trust funds, which are Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, must use the Investing in America logo in alignment with the Investing in America signage guidelines. Project construction signage should be in compliance with applicable federal or state law and Caltrans manual and guidelines, including but not limited to the provisions of the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD. Implementing agencies should refer to construction project funding identification sign website for construction sign details and requirements for projects regardless of funding source. And we do have the links in the guidelines. I removed them from the PowerPoint, but they will be there will be links there for additional guidance. And do we have any questions or comments? It looks like we have one. How will CTC collect information from projects to address that workforce development requirement? Will there be a question on the application? So we are not putting in a question on the application. We do have different links included here where you can find information on ways to report on the jobs. But as far as I know, we are still leaving it very open and flexible at this point. Matthew, unless there's something new that I have not heard. You have any new information?
No, your response is correct.
Okay. All right, so any other questions or comments? So for this one, just to recap, we are leaving it open. We're putting it in the guidelines because it is something that we are being asked to start tracking and reporting on. So we are asking you all to help us figure out what is the best way to report this information. What are you doing already that you might have access to just to be able to pull it all together and put it into a report for us? Maybe somebody has done a really good job already of collecting this kind of information, and you can share that with us as well. So it's open at this point. And if we don't have any other questions or comments, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, please. Okay, so this is a State Highway System Project Impact Assessment form. This is for Caltrans, and it is being updated. CTC staff is working in coordination with Caltrans, and we expect to have the final form updated and included in our guidelines by the August meeting. It is only required for local projects that are not Caltrans nominated, but will be interacting with state highway right-of-way. Matthew, did you have anything to add to that one?
No, just that just to specify, this only has to do with projects that are not co-nominated by Caltrans, which in local partnership, Caltrans is not an eligible applicant. So if your project has any impact to state right-of-way, it is required that your agency completes this form. This has been a requirement since cycle 1, and the purpose of this slide is just to say that our team is currently working with Caltrans on making some kind of current updates to this form. So the final form for use in the application process will be embedded in the adopted guidelines in August.
Okay. And I don't see any questions or comments on this one, so let's go ahead and move to the next one, Celeste, and thank you, Matthew. Okay, so we are moving into the formulaic guidelines. So if you want to switch over and open up the formulaic, you can follow along. A lot of these changes are identical to the ones that we have done for the competitive. Some of them are not as stringent because they're not selection criteria, but we would like to gather that information. So this one is exactly the same as what we saw for the competitive. It's just focusing on transit. And moving on to the next slide. By the way, I'm going to go pretty quickly through these because we have already talked about these, and I haven't seen any questions or comments. So if you do have any, by the way, again, don't hesitate. Okay, so this is eligible projects, and this one is exactly the same. So we're talking about toll facilities and getting permission in advance. Next slide, please. This one, supplemental funding, this one is unique to the formulaic program. The competitive program does not allow supplemental funding. So we'll slow down and take a minute and read through this one. Again, the blue text is new, but I'll read the whole thing. A taxing authority may nominate an existing program project for supplemental funding if the project was allocated formulaic program funding and the supplemental funding is programmed to the same project phase. Supplemental funding requests for pre-construction phases may be considered up to 6 months prior to the expenditure deadline. The expenditure deadline for a supplemental allocation will not be different than the original allocation. Supplemental funding for the construction phase may be considered before or after award of the construction contract. The Commission will consider a request for supplemental funding after award of the construction contract with the following requirements. First off, an unforeseen or extraordinary circumstance beyond the control of the implementing agency has occurred. There is no change to the program scope, outputs, project description, or benefits. We ask that you provide a detailed request that includes an explanation of the cost increase and why the supplemental funds are needed to complete the program scope. For projects where the commission has approved non-proportional spending, allowing for the expenditure of formulaic program funds before other funds, the project is not eligible for a supplemental allocation until all other funds committed to the project have been expended. Do we have any questions or comments on this one? I see one hand raised. And Kevin, you are ready to unmute yourself.
All right, Kevin Busey with Sacramento Transportation Authority. On the second bullet, there's no change to the program scope, outputs, project description, or benefits. What if it would actually increase the scope and outputs? I'm trying to figure out if for some reason you're awarding a project, you may have a actual additive alternative that would increase the scope of the project and actually, do more than what you said you were going to do in your original application. I'm just trying to see why it's no change, even if it's an improvement. That language seems pretty restrictive. I'm just curious. Thank you.
So I believe that this is something that Anya had put in before she had left the program. And I believe that she was borrowing this language from, I think she was borrowing it from STIP.
LaShara, I'm
Yeah.
gonna help you out on this one. So yes, I think, and Kevin, I appreciate that. So if there is a change in program scope that increases the scope, that would absolutely be allowable. If there is a decrease in scope, I think that's what we're implying here. And so this was meant to say, in a true supplemental funding fashion, we will allow LPP formula funds to be added to a project, even if scope is not changing. If scope is increasing, I would argue, I don't even know that we would consider that a supplemental funding. That would just be adding funding for additional scope. So that would not be a restriction. That would actually be allowable. And so I think it's we can tweak that language a little bit, but when this was added in a previous iteration, it was really to demonstrate that in what I would refer to as a true supplemental fashion, which means in a situation where there is no scope change, it is just simply cost increase, we will allow LPP formula money to be added. It was meant to kind of capture a scenario that wasn't originally captured. But in the scenario that you described, Kevin, that would not be restricted. I don't even know that we would necessarily consider that a supplemental funds because the scope is increasing. So that would just be placing additional funds on a project because there is additional scope. I hope that clarifies, but if you feel like the language that we currently have here would restrict an opportunity to actually increase scope, that's certainly not the intention of this language. This language was actually to kind of create an opportunity to use the funds in more of a flexible way.
I loved your answer. That was a great answer. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and LaShara, so yes, Anya included this, and for very good reason, because it was very tricky to work with the funds in a supplemental way when other SB1 programs don't have the same flexibility. And so we wrote this in a way so that we were actually trying to demonstrate the true fashion that this would be used. But with that said, if we take this back and we determine we need to make it maybe a bit more flexible, but obviously if scope is increasing, that would certainly not be restricted in this scenario.
Maybe we should use the word decrease in scope. Instead of no change, we should say if there's no decrease in the program scope.
Yes, that would be one way. Well, to be honest, let's take it back.
Yeah.
We'll take it back offline. but I want to make sure that we at least address Kevin's comment on the webinar.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, Kevin. Do we have any other questions? We do have one here asking about whether we're going to share the presentation material. And yes, we will be posting the PowerPoint presentation to our website. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Moving on to the next one. So this one is more of a description of what's allowable. It is almost identical to what is in the competitive program, except that it is not as restrictive. In the competitive program, it talks about the delivery of construction phase only. The formulaic program is broader. You can use it on the different phases. And so that part was removed, but the rest of this is identical. And I'll go ahead and read it just so we have it for us all to think about. The Commission supports and encourages innovative delivery methods. If a project is expected to use a delivery method other than design, bid, build, the project nomination should identify the delivery method. If the delivery method is unknown at time of programming, it should be reported as soon as it is known. When using the construction manager general contractor delivery method, the project will be programmed and allocated in the same manner as design, bid, build. During the environmental or design phase, construction manager, general contractor, contract cost are considered environmental or design phase expenditures. As the project advances in the design phase, it may be desirable to separate the project into packages or segments for efficiencies in the construction delivery. If this is the case, the project may be divided into separate delivery contracts, and the Commission must be notified as soon as possible. The delivery dates and the scope of work must be consistent with the approved baseline agreement. Do we have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the next one. I believe this is identical to what we saw in the competitive. This one is just specifying that at the time of allocation, you can request additional time beyond the 36 months for project completion. And next slide, please. This is also identical to what we saw in the competitive program. Just saying that, well, if the contracts are not awarded within, sorry, I apologize for the typo there. If they're not awarded within 6 months of allocation, the agency can request a contract award time extension within 1 commission meeting after expiration. If the contract award time extension is not requested by then, the project phase component will be deleted from the local partnership formulaic program. Okay, moving on to the next slide. The workforce development requirements and project signage. So this language is identical to the competitive program. The difference is that in the competitive program, it was part of the evaluation criteria. Here in the formulaic program, it is part of the, I believe it is a general description, if I'm remembering correctly, but we just want you to talk about it. It's not part of the selection criteria, but we do want to start getting some of this information included. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the first time that we are talking about community engagement and outreach in the formulaic program. So this is new text. It's not different than what you'll see in the competitive program, except like the previous slide, this is not a selection criteria. This is under general information. So we just want you to talk about this. We want to be able to report on this. I think that you probably want to be able to report on this also for your formulaic programs. and talk about how awesome your project is and how you've done all this equity and outreach. And again, we're not going to get too much into this because Naveen will talk about it more in just a few moments. Next slide, please. Okay, again, this is the same language that we saw in the competitive. There's not a difference except where it's located and what the requirements are. This is general information, not a selection criterion. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it over to Ben, so you don't have to hear me talk anymore.
So one technical change that we are making to the local partnership formulaic guidelines will be an updated version of Appendix A, which lists the taxing authorities eligible to receive local partnership formulaic funding. In our current 2022 formulaic guidelines, only the names of the eligible agencies are listed under Appendix A. In the proposed 2024 formulaic guidelines, we have updated Appendix A to provide more clarity on the voter-approved tax measures that we have on file for each eligible agency. So the 2024 guidelines will include a table that features the names of the eligible agency, the ballot measure or measures that establish eligibility for the formulaic program, and the expiration date of the measure if there is one. For the 2024 cycle, this will assist agencies in keeping track of the measures they are being credited for in the formulaic distribution calculation, and we hope will prompt them to alert commission staff if it needs to be updated, for example, when a new measure is passed. And I will pause for any questions. Seeing none, next slide, please.
Okay, I'm back. This is exactly the same as the competitive program. There is no difference here. And so we can move on. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, we're going to pass it on to Naveen, and she's going to talk about the equity supplement and the community engagement criteria. It's the same across all of the SB1 competitive programs. So if you saw this yesterday, you'll hear the same thing today, and you'll hear it again tomorrow. And Naveen.
Thanks,
Take it
Lashara.
away.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Naveen Habib. I manage the Solutions for Congested Corridors program here at the Commission. I will be sharing the proposed revisions to the Community Engagement Criterion and the Senate Bill 1 program's Transportation Equity Supplement, or as I will refer to it as Equity Supplement for short today. As Lashara said, these are embedded in each SB1 program, so they are the same across all three programs, LPP, TCEP, and SCCP. I will pause for questions at the end of each slide, but feel free to raise your hand or share any questions as we move along. As Lashara said, you will get sick of me pretty quickly because you saw me yesterday, you saw me today, and you will see me again tomorrow. And I apologize to all the SCCP stakeholders who will be there for multiple hours with me tomorrow. But I know how much you like me, so it'll be fine. Anyway, as I shared during the March 27th All SB1 Programs Equity Focused Workshop, Commission staff developed the Equity Supplement in collaboration with our Equity Advisory Roundtable and stakeholders to further the implementation of the Commission's Racial Equity Statement in the SB1 competitive programs. This supplement provided important information on indicators that could be used to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups, equity benefits, community engagement strategies, and anti-displacement resources, which were all intended to guide applicants to provide more detailed information about the project's benefits and impacts to disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. In addition, the community engagement criterion became an evaluated criterion to ensure that the project selection process resulted in projects that provide more equitable outcomes to disadvantaged communities. Members of the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee then evaluated applicant responses to the community engagement criterion, which contributed to the Commission's overall project evaluations and helped to determine which projects were awarded over $1.7 billion in SB1 program funds. As advancing equity in transportation is an evolving process, the Commission endeavors to ensure program policies progress, well, that's a PPP situation, by embedding equity considerations in the project development, nomination, and selection process. In Cycle 4, we have continued to engage and collaborate with the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee and our stakeholders to further update and develop the SB1 program guidelines to ensure that projects with more equitable outcomes are competitive for funding awards. I will move on to the next slide, please. Thank you, Celeste. All proposed changes stem from your feedback. For example, you requested that we reduce redundancy in criteria response requirements because you thought the questions were too similar, which resulted in duplicative, run-on, or broad responses. You also sought greater clarity about how to engage communities effectively, where to start, or how to continue. So we collaborated with advocates to determine more specific and proven strategies for you to reference or apply in the project development process. We also received very useful feedback during the March 27th workshop and have since proposed additional changes accordingly. And I will cover those changes specifically so that you know what's changed from March 27th. Equity, sorry, move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so here you can see the proposed updates to the equity supplement in the 2024 SB1 program guidelines. Please do remember these are draft edits and may be subject to additional changes, including based on what we hear from you today. Please remember this presentation and all corresponding materials, including everything Lashara shared beforehand, will be posted online after the workshop. Most of the proposed changes are minor edits meant to clarify intent based on feedback we received directly from you. Please also note that this entire supplement all the changes were posted with the March 27th Equity Focused Workshop. So if you have that document available and open and follow along, there are only a couple of changes that we added in, a few changes, but key changes that I will specifically go over that we added after the March 27th workshop based on the feedback we received. But the rest of the document is pretty much exactly the same as what's already posted online. So feel free to open that up and follow along if you like, but I will be sharing screenshots here in the slides that are coming up so that you have those available for reference. So with that said, we are kicking things off by amending the supplement title and removing the word competitive. The equity supplement will now apply to all SB1 programs, as Lashara said, including Formulaic. And we initiated this effort by focusing on our competitive programs alone, and now plan to advance equity into our Formulaic programs as well. Many of you have already shared the work that you are doing, so this provides you a more formal opportunity to highlight how you are incorporating equitable practices in your eligible Formulaic program projects. Next slide, please. These are the proposed revisions to the supplement's introduction and intent. While the edits may seem plentiful here, they are mostly cleanup edits to reduce redundancies. We have reiterated our intent to consider equitable practices through a project's lifecycle, which includes the planning, development, and delivery processes. Accordingly, we propose utilizing structural and procedural equity strategies like the ones provided within the supplement under Section C. Structural strategies reform planning practices to create inclusive, affordable, and resource-efficient transportation infrastructure, whereas procedural strategies provide special benefits to disadvantaged groups to create a fairness in process. We have also added additional groups to consider and engage as part of the disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups, such as displaced or unhoused persons and individuals living with disabilities. I will pause here for questions and so that you get a chance to look at that screenshot. Hopefully it's readable. If it's not, again, on our CTC workshops page, and I'll copy the link here so that you have it and you can refer to the document directly. And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know during this time. Okay. I don't think I see any questions or comments. And I've copy pasted the link into the chat box, so hopefully you can all see that there. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide since I don't see any questions. Great. This is a proposed new addition to Section A. As a reminder, Section A lists example indicators that are used to identify disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized groups. The tool or resource you'll see here is the California Department of Transportation's, or Caltrans's, Transportation Equity Index, also known as EQI, which was developed to identify transportation-based priority populations for applicable funding programs and to support planning and project level analysis and identify opportunities to advance equitable outcomes during project planning, development, and design. And the webpage is listed under there if you want to see more information, as it will also be linked in the supplement itself. I will pause here for any questions or thoughts. Okay, I don't see any hands raised and I don't see any questions. Next slide, please. This is another proposed new addition to Section A. The United States Department of Transportation's Equitable Transportation Community Explorer, or ETC, is an interactive web application which uses census tracts and data to explore the cumulative impacts of transportation underinvestment in the areas of transportation insecurity, environmental burden, social vulnerability, health vulnerability, and climate and disaster risk burden. These additional resources can be utilized independently or in combination with the other indicators provided in Section A. I think there's a question. Jesse Rosemore, do you want to come off mute to say your question, or would you prefer I read it out loud? I can read it either way, but if you would like to say it, then I can pause. I don't think I see your hand raised, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. The question is from Jesse Rosemore. Many LPP formulaic projects are facilities SGR projects. These are not easy projects to fund with grant funding, which many agencies have to do. How may we best be addressing these requirements for these types of projects? I'm going to pause and see if Lashara or Matthew want to take that question.
Yeah, well, Lashara, go ahead, but I might ask Jesse, if you can't unmute yourself, can you please spell out what facilities SGR projects are? Not that that's not a widely known term, but because of the fact we have 43 people on the call, I think it would be better if we heard. You can even type it in if you don't mind spelling out what types of projects you're referring to.
Jesse, I have click the button to allow you to unmute. There you go.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, just stated good repairs projects for our facilities. So, you know, for transit agencies, we have facilities with trackable assets, you know, roofs, security, gates, stuff like that, they need to be replaced as they go beyond their useful life. And I know our agency has used LPPF to fund these, and you know, our agency does a lot for equity and community engagement. But I just want to see if there's any guidance on how to meet these requirements for these types of projects that are not as you know, service centered focused, if that makes sense, right? Like they're needed for the backbone of our service. They're just not like so directly tied to the service that we provide as a transit agency. Hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
It makes total sense, Lashara. I don't
Yeah.
I'll just say we definitely mean something different for these requirements in the competitive LPP program than we do in the formula LPP program. And Jesse, in your description just now, obviously state of good repair for a transit district provides immense benefit to the public. If good repair is not up, you know, and so I think what we would ask from our formula applicants is really just to narrate, you know, and qualify why these funds will benefit communities. And, you know, if your transit district has an ongoing community engagement strategy or community engagement plan, you can point to that. We're not asking you to go above and beyond some of these very traditional, regular types of projects, such as state of good repair. And just so everyone on the call knows, the LPP formula program, there is not an instance where if you submit an eligible project, you would be denied funding. The only way if you submit an eligible project and we would not be able to program your funding is if you request it in a non-eligible year, you don't provide enough matching component. And so these requirements on the LPP formula program are really us trying to ask our applicants to provide additional details so that we have a better understanding and a better story to tell how that portion of SB1 funds is being used. But I just want to make it clear, Jesse, there's no instance where if, for instance, your transit district or whatever organization you represent is unable to come up with a new community engagement strategy for an LPP formula program project, there would be no instance where that would be an obstacle to you achieving your program. So I hope, and in the LPP competitive program, it would be a different story, right? Because we would actually evaluate that criteria, and unless the project is competitive elsewhere, that project might not be competitive enough for funding. That is not a characteristic of the LPP formula program. So Jesse, okay, AC Transit, yeah, absolutely, and we're very happy that AC Transit is an eligible agency for LPP formula, and yes, we understand the nuances to some of this in the formulaic program, and again, as I think Lashara said previously, maybe it was even Carl Anderson, LPP formula is meant to be a flexible program, but we are trying to ensure we're holding some standards similarly to how we do in our other SB1 programs. Lashara, I'm gonna turn it back to you. Thank you for giving me the soapbox for a moment there. If there's anything you want to add, otherwise I know Naveen has a bit more slides to go.
I don't have anything to add because I knew that you wanted the soapbox, so I'd like to have it. Naveen, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you both. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to follow Jesse's example and pop them in Q&A or raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you. I don't see any right now, so Celeste, let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a proposed new addition to Section B, example equity benefits. As a reminder, we list the example equity benefits that result from inclusion and engagement strategies, such as those provided in Section C of the Equity Supplement. In addition to clarifying edits, we have added new benefits based on project applications that were received in Cycle 3 and based on feedback from you. So I want to specifically highlight item 7 here, especially since this was a critical benefit that was yielded from a few applications in the last cycle as a direct and indirect result of community engagement practices. Greater emphasis was placed on ensuring first and last mile connectivity with multimodal options at transportation hubs to accommodate all types of travelers in the project area. I'm going to pause here for questions as well. I also wanted to, while I'm waiting on this slide, I also wanted to take a moment to thank the advocates who were a big part of helping us to further expand the benefits or to make them more specific. That went a long way. So we really appreciate all of the feedback we received from all of our partners. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any questions or comments, and I will move on to the next slide, please. These are our proposed revisions and new additions to Section C, which provides example inclusion and engagement strategies. Again, the goal with these revisions is to further clarify intent, which is not to simply inform communities, it is to include and engage them through the life cycle of the project development process. Based on feedback we received during the March 27th equity-focused workshop, we further specified the types of engagement strategies that may be utilized, such as direct or indirect engagement strategies. Now, direct strategies may include meeting with community leaders to develop relationships, whereas indirect strategies may include sending out polls to survey community needs. But combined, these strategies can result in mutually beneficial relationships and partnerships, and provide access to critical information for residents, community leaders, and applicant agencies alike. Continuing on to the next slide, we have further expanded the potential strategies and tactics applicants may utilize to develop or bolster their inclusion and engagement efforts. As we continue to learn, mindful and meaningful inclusion and engagement are critical to successfully advancing equity in transportation planning, as well as project development and delivery to cultivate thriving, harmonious communities in our state. Again, don't let the red ink here intimidate or confuse you in any way. Like I said, we further expanded the information or provided specific examples based on feedback we received from you and our partners and advocates. So we've expanded a lot of information here, and hopefully these strategies can be used, or tactics, some of them are tactics, can be utilized to maybe enhance or support your existing or new developing engagement plans and activities, I should say. I'm going to pause here for questions. You are a very quiet group. Or I'm just that great. You just love everything I'm saying. That's great. That's positive feedback, LPP group.
Well,
Okay.
Naveen, I'll just say maybe I do recognize a lot of these folks. They probably heard you say this yesterday too. So you should be careful because they'll all get to hear it again tomorrow in the congested corridors workshop.
They will. They will. It'll be fine. I'm just going to say thank you for joining us. And if you are one of the unfortunate souls who has to listen to this a third time tomorrow, I don't know. I'll try to make it more entertaining. I'll wear a hat or something. I don't know. Something fun. I'll try. Okay, seeing no comments or questions or hands raised, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Thank you, Celeste. So these final 3 slides include our proposed revisions and new additions to the community engagement criterion included in all SB1 program guidelines. Next slide, please. The goal here was to align the information in the community engagement criterion with the proposed changes in the equity supplement that I just shared. Again, these edits are focused on reducing repetition and redundancy. A new addition here is to not only see whether community feedback was incorporated into the project, but to confirm whether the community was informed of how their feedback was incorporated. And the emphasis is on the second part simply because we already asked you the first part of the question previously in cycle 3. So the reason why we added on to this question is to close that feedback loop. It's engagement and inclusion is not just limited to soliciting information from the community and then moving on from there. It includes coming back around and closing that loop and saying, hey, we heard you, this is what our takeaways were, and this is what we plan to do or have done with the feedback that we received. So if you could talk about that in your narrative or demonstrate it in your community engagement plan, that would, I think, go a long way to responding to this particular question. Going to pause here for questions or comments.
Kevin, I believe you are still able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just looking at these and I'm not that familiar with these requirements, but I mean, the challenge I see is that these requirements will be adopted and incorporated into the guidelines for various competitive programs, most of them that fund construction, some that fund construction as well as engineering. And they are to address, both equity as well as community engagement, which is something that probably should have happened years ago for these projects that are submitting in the winter of 24. So there's a weird timing component of this where the guidelines are being updated for projects that are looking for construction funding to utilize it. The requirements are being set for stuff that should have occurred probably years ago. And I guess the question in this is, what are these these projects that we've been working on for a while to get positioned for these funding, these new requirements, what are these agencies supposed to do? Like, just generally, like, what are you expecting from these agencies that may already miss these opportunities or should have taken these opportunities in the past?
That's a great question, Kevin. If you will allow me, I want to move on to the next slide, Celeste, because I will cover that question and then I'll go into more detail in responding to your question as well. That's a great question. Kevin gets the award for question of the moment for equity. So the other new addition is the last paragraph that you see on this slide, based on, again, feedback that we received during the March 27th equity focused workshop. We have clarified that pre-existing community engagement plans can be referenced to respond to this criterion. We understand that not all agencies have the bandwidth to develop new community engagement plans, or that perhaps they may have developed one in the recent past. We have suggested limiting qualifying past plans or activities to those that were developed no more than 5 years ago. This preference is somewhat arbitrary, but it is based on the period often utilized by transportation and strategic plans, and assumes that community demographics will not change drastically in less than 5 years' time. And that is where Kevin's question comes in, because we got some really great discussion going about this item at the TSEP workshop yesterday, where we were talking about this exact same issue. It's like, and from a different perspective, where some of these projects are long-term. Like 10, 20 years in the making, and they may or may not have done some engagement or no engagement, or might start to do some now. So I would say 2 things. One, if your project is the kind where it's a long-term project or is ready for construction and you have not committed to doing any community engagement work or plans, then see if you can do some engagement now. It's okay that you haven't performed any in the past few years, but in your narrative, you can pop in like what you hope to do now during construction, pre-construction, or after construction, how you want to engage the community in case you have other construction coming up or other projects coming up in the same corridor, in the same project area. And then if you are a project that, or if you have a project that is like 10, 20 years old, and maybe you created a community engagement plan like way back at the start, but you have performed some sort of engagement recently within the last like 1 to 5 years, as long as it's within that 5-year block that you committed to doing some form of engagement work, you can still talk about that. So any new or continuing engagement would be qualifiable as a response to this criterion. Kevin, I see your hand is raised again. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to like provide, I love your answer, by the way, great answer. I would just for maybe this helps a little bit. So for the local partnership competitive funding, specifically, you know, we have a measure that was approved by the voters in 2004, which began in 2009. So it is like a 20-year-old measure. It has very specific projects listed. We're obviously trying to use the local partnership program funding that to move those projects forward. And you know, I'd be honest with you that I don't think equity was probably really top of mind 20 years ago. And even some of the engagement wasn't there. So we have this list of projects working on that's kind of outdated. And I'm not trying to, this isn't a question, I just some background on some of the issues maybe some of these other self-help counties have with these older measures in trying to meet these guidelines. So I just want to provide that for clarity. Thank you.
No, that helps a lot, Kevin. Thanks for sharing that perspective. And I'm sure that that perspective is not limited to you or one county alone. Like you said, it might be self-help county-wide as an issue. And with formula funds, like Matthew said, and like Lashara mentioned earlier in her presentation too, it is different than the competitive funding stream. So if you're already doing the work, or if you've done some of this work, then it's a great chance for you to highlight that in your formulaic application or narrative that you provide for that program. It is not like you will be precluded from getting those funds, from receiving them. But I do think that there are some groups that have started some of this work or have been engaged in this work. And we just wanted to provide an opportunity for them to highlight the work that they are doing or trying to do. It's not in an effort to penalize anybody by any means. So, and your point about the historical background there is well noted. And I think I would even say it applies to the very large on-system projects as well that have been ongoing for, in some cases, 20, 30 years, right, for a specific corridor. So we are aware that those difficulties do exist. And then with COVID and the supply chain issues, like there's a lot of impeding concerns. And we do appreciate that all of our applicants and partner agencies are willing to get engaged in the process to develop more equitable outcomes, projects with equitable outcomes. But we are also aware that there are long-term ongoing projects that may or may not have really outdated community engagement plans or have not maybe engaged with the community as much as we want them to because they didn't know how to or where to go. So this is an effort. We're all part of it together. It's a collective exercise, and we learn from you and you learn from us, and we're hoping that it will continue to advance. That's why we started with introducing equity and being more specific with the supplement and offering those tools and resources in cycle 3. And in cycle 4, the theme is to advance equity and hopefully provide you more resources to do that work. Thanks again for that question. I really appreciate it.
Naveen, this is Lashara. I just wanted to let you know that we do have one additional comment. I'm not sure how to say the name, so excuse me if I say it wrong, but Verhaen is saying thank you.
Oh.
So they're appreciating the conversation. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing, Lashara. This does conclude my presentation, but if there are any other comments or questions, I am happy to listen in and provide responses. If there are any questions that are specific to LPP formulaic or competitive programs, or even just equity supplement broadly or community engagement, I'm happy to respond to those right now. And if you think of something later that's specific to the presentation I've provided here, you can contact me at naveen.habib@catc.ca.gov. My name is spelled the way that you see it in Zoom. This information is also available online on the CTC webpage under staff contact list on the Solutions for Congested Corridors webpage. And it's also embedded in our save the dates and any materials that are posted online. We really, really want you to contact us if you have any questions or comments. Shelley, hello.
Hi, Naveen. Thank you for your segment of this workshop and for all the road showing you're doing. I was not in the workshop yesterday, so this was all newish to me, but I was told that at that workshop there was encouragement for stakeholders to send letters to the commission on any of the projects that are submitted for consideration, along with any other letters that the application included. And so I'm wondering if the commission received like some letters of opposition for specific applications, would they communicate that with the applicant and open opportunity for a response or feedback before they made their final staff recommendations?
That's a good comment, Shelley. And I think even more, it might resonate for any folks that are new to SB1 guidelines and the public process generally. So happy to answer that. Yes, so at TSEP workshop, just to give a little bit of background on what Shelley's mentioning, at the workshop yesterday, we received a comment from, I believe, a community leader or organizer who wanted to know the perspective on how to engage with a project in their community or in their region from a community perspective, as opposed to a state agency or regional agency perspective. And I had responded and said, well, that would be up to you if you wanted to provide if you want to engage your local and regional agencies like your planning agency, your city council, or whatever that looks like, that makeup looks like in your specific community area, and to work with the project team that's operating in that area. And hopefully you can build a contact base there and raise any opposition or concerns you might have to a project directly with them. In the case of how to engage from a community perspective with the commission, we informed that they can share any letters of support for a project or letters of opposition with a project with us directly. As far as I'm aware, we typically take all the letters, all the information we receive, and we do include that as part of our publicly posted materials. So if we do project, for example, when we do our program of projects and we do our staff recommendations, we post all letters that are received about a project with that particular book item. So you can see them all posted online as attachments and review what letters we received, whether they're support or opposition. Typically, what I've noticed is that if we're receiving a letter of opposition or even a letter of support, whichever it is, it has typically been shared with the agency already, with Caltrans, with us, with CalSTA, and usually also with the team that's developing the project in the corridor. So everyone is aware of it. I see Matthew has his hand raised, so I'm going to see if he has anything additional to add to this comment.
Thanks, Naveen. No, and everything you said was entirely accurate. And yesterday, I think I spoke up as well. And Shelley, I hope that this addresses your concern. So what I said yesterday, in addition to what Naveen said, was that when we receive applications from the application deadline until the point where we post staff recommendations, the commission staff goes into a vacuum, right? We prefer not to need to request any additional information from our stakeholders. And if there are public comments that are received through that process, they're obviously received. However, we wouldn't use them as independent information to inform our decision if it's external to the application. What I can say is if we received, comment from members of the public on a given project, and we felt compelled to explore that comment further, we would absolutely make sure that whatever agency was sponsoring that project was looped in so that we would get two sides of the coin of the story, right? So I want to make sure that, and then once the staff recommendations are out, that's when we typically get most comments, positive or negative, because everyone understands now what types of projects or what specific projects are going to be recommended for funding. If we receive anything before that deadline, because of the goal of ours to not seek or receive information external to what the applications have, I can say that if we were compelled to make any determinations based on anything we received in that window of time, we absolutely would not proceed without having the full side of the story. So I hope that addresses what you, I think, might be concerned about, because obviously I can understand that once we post a receipt log, it might take a little bit of time for folks, community members, to understand what's even being considered for funding. If we receive anything after the fact and we feel like we need to verify it because it could influence our decision making, we will do due diligence and ensure that we are communicating to individuals. But obviously that's all on the pretense that there are no funding decisions being made yet. Everything is still being evaluated, right? So if we reach out to any agencies, that doesn't demonstrate that we are saying that would be a competitive project at that point in time. It would just be us trying to follow through with valid community concerns.
Yes, thank you, Naveen and Matthew. That all makes sense. It's very reassuring.
I'll also add just one last thing to Matthew in light of Matthew's comments is there were a few project applicants from, I want to say cycle 3 and maybe even a couple from cycle 2 and SCCP, where applicant agencies actually included any concerns that they had heard from the community within the project narrative. Like when they provided an introduction, like if they had any concerns that they were mitigating, or if there were any opposition that they wanted to provide like their side of the story to, they just included it within the project application too. So there is that opportunity too, if you are aware that some opposition exists or some concerns exist. Opposition sounds like a very intense way of saying it. Usually, sometimes it's not opposition, it's just there are some concerns. If you have those and you want to talk about them, you can certainly include that within the application. Just for background for us to consider or to know about. You don't have to by any means. It's just that's an additional option as well. Any other questions or comments? I don't see any hands raised, but if there are, please feel free to let me know. As I was saying earlier, you can also email us or you can show up to the SCCP workshop tomorrow and share your comments there. That's fine too. Alrighty, well, I will turn it back to Lashara and Ben, and I think they will move on with the rest of the presentation. Thank you so much for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Naveen. Okay, so this is time for some open discussion. We've had good discussion so far. I do have a few comments also I'd like to share with this slide. As we've mentioned before, this process relies heavily on the discussions and feedback that we engage in with you, our partners, and our stakeholders. Our discussions with you during the Cycle 3 debrief sessions served as a launchpad to improving Cycle 4 guidelines. And the changes presented today culminate the Cycle 4 public guidelines development process that we kicked off in December of 2023. We've hosted 5 public workshops and over 30 individual office hour sessions during this period. And thank you for providing your feedback effectively and timely, and we appreciate your participation. And please note that we cannot make any major substantive, I can't say that word, but you know what I'm trying to say, alterations to the guidelines after the public workshop process has concluded, and that's today and tomorrow. Any final feedback must be submitted in writing to program managers by Thursday, May 30th. That's 1 week from today. And this may be considered during our executive review. And with that, I would like to open it up. I don't know if we have any other questions or comments. We've had good discussion so far. So I will pause for just a moment. And if anything has come up during the course of this presentation that hasn't been spoken yet, now is your chance. Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on to the next slide. And remember, you do have until May 30th to send your emails with comments for any of the programs, really. The SCCP, the TCEP, and the LPP. Okay, Ben, you want to recap our office hours?
Yes, I would. So, next slide, please. Office hours for the SB1 programs were held from March to May in closed virtual sessions. The purpose of these office hour sessions was to discuss technical questions regarding proposed projects. In all, 24 appointments were requested and scheduled for the local partnership program, wherein 47 projects were discussed with agencies. 11 of these meetings were solely between agencies and the local partnership program staff. And the majority of office hour sessions were requested by local agencies. We had a few appointments with consulting firms, but the lion's share was with local agencies, and I do recognize a few names from people who did request appointments. Finishing my summary, next slide, please. And Lashara, your show again.
All right, so we are concluding this presentation for today. This workshop is finished. If you take it to the next slide, please, Celeste. This is our timeline. The formulaic and the competitive, as far as the guideline development, are pretty in step with each other. The difference is that the formulaic funding distribution we will release early. So the goal is to have it released 1 week before we present the draft guidelines to the commission. But we don't have a definite date on that yet, but look out for that. And then guideline adoption in August. And then applications will be due in November. So we do have staggered due dates for all of the SB1 programs. For the formulaic, this is for the initial program of projects. That would be November 15. And for the competitive, that's going to be November 20th. The difference for the formulaic and the competitive, of course, is that the competitive, you have to have your application in by November 20th. If you have formula funds and you want to be included in the initial program of projects, get your application in by November 15th, but then you will have another 2 years, the rest of the cycle, to actually program and allocate your formula funds. Also, the program adoption for the formulaic program will be in January because we don't have to go through that extensive evaluation process. But for the competitive, we will adopt that program in June of 2025. And with that, if there are no questions or comments, and I'm not seeing anybody jumping in real quick, I want to just take a moment to thank you all for joining us today and staying with us for almost the whole 2 hours. And I look forward to seeing you all at future meetings and reading any of your comments and emails that you're going to send to me. And with that, have a good afternoon.